Warren Buffett is infamous for his profound financial wisdom, but there's something Buffett said in 1991 that proved he wasn't just the Mr. Nice Guy investor from Omaha. But first we must rewind a bit. How many of you heard of the Salomon brothers? Founded in 1910 by, you guessed it, Salomon brothers Arthur, Herbert, and Percy. They established themselves as a money brokerage business, then expanded into underwriting in 1915. The problem was that the underwriting business was dominated by a handful of old banks that had two things the Salomon brothers lacked: high-class connections and reputation. The Salomon brothers needed a big break, and World War I served as just that. Time for a short history lesson. In 1917, the United States desperately needed a way to fund the war in Germany. The big idea was effectively to get American citizens to loan the US government money, which would be repaid with interest in the future. And so the Liberty Loan Act of 1917 was born, allowing the federal government to issue a volume of government bonds the likes of which the country had never seen. Well-to-do connections were no longer a prerequisite of doing business, and Salomon Brothers became a dominant player in the government bond market as a result. The brothers capitalized on this new market, and by the 1930s, the Salomon Brothers had set up shop in 6 cities around the Northeast and Midwestern United States. Under the leadership of the family's golden boy heir, William "Billy" Salomon, the firm grew its block trading and underwriting activities, and by the end of the 1960s, Salomon joined Lehman Brothers, Blythe, and Merrill Lynch to become the fearsome foursome. Then came the era of John Gutfreund, and nobody knew it at the time, but this was the beginning of the end. John Gutfreund joined Salomon as a statistics trainee in the 1950s per request of Billy Salomon, his golf partner. Gutfreund quickly climbed the Salomon ranks and was named partner at the young age of 34. At 49, he was named CEO. According to Lewis, Gutfreund was known to tell his employees that a trader needs to wake up every morning ready to bite the ass of a bear. That should give you an idea of how things went down under Gutfreund's watch. These guys called themselves Big Swinging. This is all part of what many have described as a frat boy culture, when practical jokes, pranks, and hazing were commonplace. But, despite the practical jokes, the firm was known as an innovator in the bond market. In fact, Salomon developed the first private mortgage-backed security in the late 1980s. Bonus fact, now celebrities Michael Lewis and Mayor Mike Bloomberg were also at Salomon during this time. It was at this time, under Gutfreund, that everything started to fall apart. Here's how the scandal went down. Salomon and other investment banks were forbidden from buying up more than 35% of US Treasuries at any given auction, a new rule formed in 1990 to prevent such behemoths as Salomon from cornering the market. But the bank found ways around this limitation, using customer accounts to purchase treasuries on the bank's behalf. Trader Paul Moser submitted illegal bids for US Treasury securities in August of 1990, purchasing more than 35% share allowed per individual transaction. Moser's supervisor, John Merriweather, chastised the bid when it came to his attention, but let Moser stick around. But Moser didn't just stick around, and this time there were real consequences. In May 1991, the firm cornered the Treasury securities market a second time. It was not just a case of bending the rules, it put Salomon on the brink of failure. This time, the Securities and Exchange Commission noticed. Salomon was banned from trading in US Treasuries and fined the highest fine ever leveraged against a bank at the time, $290 million. Moser was suspended, Gutfreund was forced to resign in August. The company was on the brink of bankruptcy. Now, let's rewind a little to the 1980s. During this entire decade, Salomon Brothers' mortgage trading department was, by and far, the largest arranger and trader of mortgage securities. They were recognized as one of the most influential firms on Wall Street throughout the 1980s. In fact, in 1987, a New York Times report identified Salomon Brothers in the top tier firms consisting of Salomon Brothers, along with Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs. They were hailed as being the most profitable firm on Wall Street, as well as the most desired firm to work for. This caught the attention of none other than Warren Buffett, who at the time did not have the same degree of notoriety that he has today. Berkshire Hathaway purchased 14% of Salomon for $700 million. It was Buffett's largest ever investment in a single company. The deal also allowed Gutfreund to stave off attack artist Ron Perelman, who seemed poised to buy a large block of Salomon stocks from certain South African investors wanting to sell. With Berkshire's $700 million, Gutfreund was able to strike a deal that allowed Salomon itself to buy the South African stock, and with that, Perelman was dispatched. Buffett said in his letter to shareholders that year, "We, of course, have no special insights regarding the direction or future profitability of investment banking. What we do have a strong feeling about is the ability and integrity of John Gutfreund, CEO of Salomon Inc. Charlie and I like, admire, and trust John. We have seen John steer clients away from transactions that would have been unwise, but that the client clearly wanted to make, even though his advice provided no fee. Such service above self behavior is far from the automatic in Wall Street. These sentiments were reaffirmed in the investment agreement, which stipulated that Mr. Buffett will vote his shares with the board only so long as Mr. Gutfreund or somebody else who he approves of runs the securities house. This is perhaps the only bank deal that Buffett would prefer to forget, and perhaps also the only time Buffett's judgment of someone was so terribly wrong. A Fortune article explains a hairy phone call between Buffett and Salomon's top ranks. Thursday, August 8. Buffett was put through to Salomon's president, Tom Strauss, and its inside lawyer, Donald Feuerstein, who told him that because Gutfreund's plane had been held up, they would instead brief Buffett on a problem that had arisen. Speaking calmly, they said that Salomon had discovered that two of its government securities traders, including the Top Gun managing director Paul Moser, a name Buffett didn't know, had broken the Treasury's bidding rules on more than one occasion in 1990 and 1991. Feuerstein then read a draft of the release to Buffett and added that earlier in the day he had talked at some length to Salomon director Charles D. Munger, Berkshire's vice chairman, and Buffett's sidekick in everything important. On that Thursday night, with other payphones chattering all around him, Buffett did not hear nearly that much detail, nor detect, in Strauss and Feuerstein's matter-of-fact tones, any reason to be particularly alarmed, so he went back to dinner. Only on Saturday, when he reached Munger, then vacationing on a northern Minnesota island, did Buffett get a sense of real trouble. It came to light that not a single Salomon exec, including Gutfreund himself, reported the crime to the New York Federal Reserve, despite concluding that this action should be taken. This was the inaction that Buffett later described as inexplicable and inexcusable. Confidence in Salomon was eroding. It is not good for any securities firm to lose the world's confidence, but if the firm is credit dependent, as Salomon was to an extreme, it cannot tolerate a negative change in perceptions. Trouble was all around, and in the conversation Gutfreund and Strauss questioned their ability to keep leading Salomon. Thursday, 15th of August, 6:45 a.m. Omaha time, Buffett was awakened by a phone call. On the line were Gutfreund, Strauss, and Marty Lipton. Gutfreund said that he and Strauss were resigning, and the question of who was going to take over sort of hung there. Gutfreund later said he asked Buffett to take the job. Buffett looked down at a just-arrived fax of that day's New York Times story, whose front-page headline said, "Wall Street sees a serious threat to Salomon Bros. High-level resignations and client defections feared." At 7:45 a.m. Omaha time, he called the Salomon Group back and said he would take on the job until things got straightened out. To this day, newspapers report that he went in to protect Berkshire's $700 million, but that seems awfully simplistic. Sure, he wished for the safety of that investment, but beyond that, he was a director of a company in deep trouble and, in a way that few directors do, he felt an obligation to all its shareholders. Buffett took the helm of Salomon CEO, cleaned house of those responsible for the crimes, and stood before Congress to use his reputation to help save the bank. He was successful. Buffett made one thing clear to his remaining Salomon employees. He asked each of them to be his or her own compliance officer, stating that they must be willing to have any contemplated act appear the next day on the front page of their local paper. He would go on to deliver one of his most famous quotes to the House Committees on Energy and Commerce. "Lose money for the firm, and I will be understanding. Lose a shred of reputation for the firm, and I will be ruthless." There would be no more benefit of the doubt or turning a blind eye. Buffett would fire anybody who cost his firm's reputation. As it was, Salomon emerged from that weekend with just enough stamina to limp through some exceedingly tough months in which the interim CEO reduced leverage by vastly shrinking the balance sheet, haggled with banks about money Salomon badly needed, and hoped above all else that Moser's wrongdoing, which cost him nearly 4 months in prison after he pleaded guilty to lying to the Fed, would not entrap Salomon itself in criminal charges. Salomon was acquired by Travelers in 1997 for $9 billion, with Buffett walking away with $1.7 billion. Travelers and Salomon never really saw eye to eye on the way Salomon conducted business, leaving Travelers to disband most of Salomon's infamously volatile trading activity shortly after the acquisition.